Hi there, and welcome to this Mad Sense video. I want to talk a bit about myself and my background, just to give you an idea of my kind of thinking style when I'm, making sense of madness and answering the what lead questions that are so characteristic of the experience. So my first job was as a civil engineer. So I worked as a civil engineer for 7 or 8 years. What I take away from that experience is that it taught me a very systematic way of thinking, of a way of applying first principles to achieve results and outcomes. Civil engineering, in particular, you're dealing with a lot of materials that don't behave exactly. So steel, for example, in the building has pretty consistent properties, and you can design buildings and structures in a pretty straightforward way. At the other end of the scale, something like soils, for example, behave less predictably, and you need to kind of figure out models for assessing, say, the relationship between moisture and how compact it is to figure out whether or not the building will stand on it. And basically, that's just this taking first principles and applying it to a context to achieve an outcome. So for me, that's what I sort of take away from that experience and found very useful. From both studying and working as a civil engineer. After some time as an engineer, I got tired of it. I wasn't entirely sure what I wanted to do, but what I started doing was another degree. So I did part-time. So I did a second degree in operations research, which is about the sort of mathematical optimization of processes, and business economics, which is essentially a social science. Where it took me is to a career in management consulting. So I've been working as a management consultant for 25 years or so. And this is what we call implementation consulting. So business improvement, working on our clients' premises for a fairly long duration, 9 to 18 months typically, working alongside people in the organization to implement new methods of working. Typical business process re-engineering work alongside IT systems and how they support the processes. And then, of course, the people side of the business, the organizational behavior, which, of course, includes coaching and getting the best talent from people. And, of course, this is where my understanding of behavior comes from. It's focused on achieving high performance from individuals and from a culture that an organization creates. And one of the most interesting courses that I did during this career as a management consultant was a course in Neuro Linguistic Programming. Which means pretty much what it says. Neuro is mind and brain, linguistic is language. So it talks about how language programs the mind. And of course, although I studied it in a business context, we used it to shape a sort of deep questioning process to help us understand our clients' needs, because it was very important that we and they understood what they wanted and what they were likely to get at the end of a 9 or 18-month project. This, of course, it worked very well with our clients. And of course, NLP is also something that you can apply to yourself. And the way that it works is actually, it provides a model of the mind, an understanding of how the mind works, and it provides techniques for accessing the automated mind, which I'm calling the brain, using the executive mind, which I'm calling the mind. So that's right at the mind-brain connection, if you like. And what it does is it teaches you to recognize your programs, interrupt them, and change them by changing, usually you're recognizing them either at an emotion or an outcome, but you change them by using language, basically. And what it does is, it teaches you to think differently, to put the emphasis on outcomes, to ask questions related to outcomes. And what it does actually is it sort of conditions your thinking healthily. That's the big advantage of it. And actually, when I started to, not when I started to hear voices, but about a year after I started to hear voices, I realized that what I was doing differently than other people that I'd met and read about who heard voices is that I was applying my practice of NLP as an immediate response to what voices said and what they presented to me. So I was interrupting the stimulus and the reaction and response that it provoked, and I was replacing it with something that was actually more useful to me in two ways. One, I was creating a good transaction so that the emotional product of the transaction was a more pleasant one. And of course, I wasn't accepting what voices were throwing at me. I was interrupting it and saying, actually, I get better value from the real world. So I was replacing my response by bringing the focus back to the real world instead of to voices. That's sort of fundamentally what I was doing. But once I realized that actually that I had done that intuitively based on my practice of NLP, I set about turning that into a systematic approach and tools, which you'll see in other videos. So I always say that I have about 60,000 hours of analyzing the phenomenology of voices, asking, not just the what the bleep questions that this phenomenology provokes, but I was also asking what the bleep questions about the phenomenology itself. And I was very determined to understand it. I knew that what had gone wrong was that the stimulus was provoking a reaction and a response that I didn't like. So I focused on the phenomenology and said, what is it about this weird stimulus that's provoking the reaction and the response that it did? And of course, voices kept provoking me, and of course gave me lots and lots of stimuli to analyze, as I say, about 60,000 hours worth of this horrible stimulus. So as you know, by now I use the Jack in the Box to represent it. That's what I was asking the what the bleep questions about. This is what researchers are calling the phenomenology. And I use over here the kind of the capital P in the word underlined with in the word provocation. That actually comes from Ed De Bono, who is well known in the business world for understanding behavior. He teaches a methodology called provocation to encourage creative thinking. And the way that it works is he basically, the methodology basically posits an outlandish statement as being true, and people work from that statement as if it was true to provoke a different kind of thinking. So I'm using to say that actually this is what voices did. They presented this pretty outlandish stuff for me, and it provoked my thinking in a creative way. I don't consider myself Einstein, but certainly I think that actually this idea of provocation might be what is behind the link between a madness and creativity. Because I certainly had plenty of creative thought experiments, which unfortunately became the experience of it, because as you'll see in my other videos, asking these what the bleep questions becomes the experience of it. But this is what shaped my thinking. So this is my background before I heard voices. I've had 10 years of this, let's say, which is about 60,000 hours. Of course, I didn't do all of this in isolation. I read a lot about it. I tested my ideas. I've lived in New York for the last 3 until recently. So in New York, I became a very active member of the mental health community, participated in the Hearing Voices movement, the Hearing Voices network, going to their support group meetings. I've been to an Intervoice conference in Madrid. I've done their facilitator training for support groups. And of course, there are other conferences that I've been to. One with ISBS, which is this Society of Mental Health Professionals proactively looking for alternative approaches. I went to one of their conferences in Boston. Of course, you meet a lot of people there, mental health professionals. I went to another conference in Chicago, organized by the International Consortium on Hallucination Research, fantastic conference in which they presented a range of ideas, right from the phenomenology, understanding it, imaging it in the brain, how they tracked all the way right through to service delivery and measuring outcomes. I mean, it was a marvelous range of ideas and interests. I've had some conversations with some individuals in particular. researchers at the University of Durham in the UK. They have a big program called Hearing the Voice, funded by the Wellcome Trust. So there've been a few people there that have been very kind with their time in having sort of conversations, about my approach and my understanding of this. And as you'll see here, I mean, what they value most is my understanding actually of the phenomenology, and how I actually translate this into understanding the experience, and of course my models for dealing with it. I worked with somebody from Colombia. We did a joint presentation for a group called Taste of Science, a rather fun group that brings researchers into pubs and restaurants of an evening for about 2 hours. Everybody has a drink and listens to a couple of scientists doing their presentation. So Guillermo Hoja and I did a joint presentation where I spoke about the experience, he spoke about imaging. And I spoke to people at the Center for Practice Innovations in New York. This is a joint venture between Columbia University and the New York State Office of Mental Health. They're essentially a group that are doing consulting to a number of states actually on the whole gamut of first episode interventions. And then of course, read a lot, so met a lot of people, in the process, doing some from Made in America, which is a very interesting website, sort of changing the conversation. It's a whole range of organizations representing voice hearers, professionals, academics, and in service delivery. And this is my favorite reference from one of my seminar attendees, who after one conversation of an hour and a half, well, it wasn't even a one-on-one conversation, it was me presenting to a group, walked away and said, I applied what you talked about, and now I only hear one voice and can ignore it pretty well. It's really made a remarkable difference. And that actually came primarily from gaining a different understanding of the experience and the interaction with this thing that we call hearing voices. So there's a huge benefit to just a different cognitive understanding of what is going on. When you recognize what's happening in the process, you can actually identify the levers where you can act, and that's the basics, the basis of my whole approach. So thank you for watching this video and this channel. I hope you will subscribe. I want to keep the recovery model and tools free on this site for people who hear voices. If you can help me do that, I have a fundraiser called Someone You Know Hears Voices on crowdrise.com. On social media, please use this hashtag MadSense. You can contact me on greg@mad-sense.com if you would like to work together. Sign up on my website. Find me on Twitter @greggieboy_LRG. And these people, of course, I've just mentioned, would also welcome donations. So if you're able to help, please do. And thank you for watching this channel.